Hello Sounders, it is Mick here. After an enjoyable weekend, marred by events across the world. But I'm going to put that to sad side and stay with Pompey. I was reminded last week that in terms of points and games played, Pompey are in exactly the same position they have been 1 calendar year ago. 17 points from 19 games. In other words, struggling. But you never have realised we've been in this same dire straits before if you'd read Pompey's recent critics the last week. I know there aren't that many of these people, but they do have a corrosive effect, far exceeding their number. So I'm going to briefly mention them because they weaken the club with their words and ongoing prediction of crisis. We'll start off with a gentle one, a well-followed fan whose comments on our recent struggles is typical of many. He wrote, Kirk for Sadie, Bianchini for, what was his name? Paddy Lane, couldn't remember his name for a minute. Yang for Richie, LaRue and Kozhnowski for Potts. That's very questionable, the guy said. Very questionable recruitment, team decision making. It's an interesting argument. But, it's comparing loans with permanence, youth with experience, in a completely muddled fashion. And, let's face it, Sadie, Lane and Richie, much as we may have looked back on them with affection, they can't, this is true, they can't hold places in League One at present. And so is it worth making a fuss about them departing? It's a debating point, but without much point. Another person posted the old aeroplane over Fratton message that it hauled behind it. You'll remember the one. Eisner's no ambition, no plan. You can question the plan, of course, Sounders. But a 10-minute walk round Fratton Park blows that out of the sky these days. A more typical comment came from a journalist who should know better, really. At the beginning of December, for goodness sake, he wrote, League One rerun looks inevitable. And he also went on to say, Mousinho is under real pressure. Really? Really? I haven't heard that from any proper fan. I haven't read it in any reputable bit of writing. There's another regular carper who posted, owners never say no when we wanted a player because we never asked for one who costs real money. Well, this guy's obviously a millionaire, this critic, or someone who thinks football money is different from real life, like playing Monopoly, which is presumably what he does. Sorry to moan about these sort of critics, Sounders, and I know we're all worried for Pompey this season. We were deceived by our success towards the end of last season, deceived into believing ourselves established in this league when, of course, we weren't and aren't, and it's sort of a shock to our system. But some people, a few, just a few, are keen for Pompey to fail. Mainly, it seems to me, because of the Eisners, because they are Americans, or perhaps because they're filthy rich, or maybe simply because they're foreign. I don't know. You tell me. But it doesn't help our club to establish in the Championship. That's all. So yesterday, or whatever day it was on Saturday for you now, was a good day. The team started well, and they didn't get any early reward. They started far too soon after that to lose confidence. 10, 15 minutes after they'd started. The confidence, you could see it sapping away from them. They conceded a horrible Fratton goal. And then, of course, the crowd joined in the wobble, audibly groaning at mistakes, all too aware of the consequences of another defeat. Half-time came and went without a concerted lift across the park from player or fan. Blackburn dug in, as they've done this season away from home apparently, determined to leave us isolated below them in the table. And then, finally, on the hour, and with Bishop and Kolshnowski on the field, Pompey blitzed the Blackburn goal with a volley of shots from Chaplin and Lang, and the crowd were lit. They saw the intensity of the side, and they believed. And that, Sounders, is what it needed. We grew a pair of lungs. The team grew in aggression, and Lang scored a cracking goal. What a cross that was, by the way. And everyone who said at the half-time they settled for a point, and there were quite a lot of us, could feel that 3 were now possible. Blackburn crumbled. Todd Cantwell, their captain, and I remember him, such a promising midfielder for Norwich in the Premiership and then Rangers in Scotland. He came off, and Pompey scored again. And that was particularly gratifying, that Boat's clean header clattered into the net, because here is a young guy playing only his 6th start for the club after an injury-ruined first season, having been signed from Fulham as typical of a policy that Pompey were going to pursue. Buy young talent, develop it, improve it, and improve our football team. A strategy very much doubted and questioned in the last few weeks. And it won't come off for every youngster that we buy. No one surely expects that. It would be ridiculous. But if it works for a few, it will, in the end, be justified. Of course, I better now shut up about Ibane Boat, because, as you all know so well, one swallow does not make a summer, or whatever the saying is. Time, Sounders will tell, to stay with cliches. But I was pleased with for Boat, and Pompey won and cashed in 3 points into the struggle for survival. And it all became a good weekend for you, for me, and the team. the team. Okay, Nicola Schmidt is a good man. I still feel his distribution isn't as effective as it was last season. But he was certainly helped when Colby Bishop reappeared in front of him, because there was a target. There was a target he could see, and he knew would fight for the ball, and he knew that something could be achieved by finding him. And I don't feel that I feel he's a bit unsure of what he's got in front of him that he can rely on, and possibly he's trying too hard. Distribution's become much more of a problem for him, but he's a good man. Terry Devlin grows in confidence, which makes him a better player, of course. His strength, determination, ability in the air, a great ability in the air for a non-giant, are all to be enjoyed. He can still, I think, be impetuous. Well, in fact, that's obvious, he can be. And there's a mistake in him as a result. But he got man of the match. Zach Swanson arguably had his best game at left back anyway for Pompey. His confidence is also growing. And even though it's not obviously his chosen position, he could perhaps hold down the left back slot till Conor Ogilvie gets back. Certainly if he continues like that. And he has got massive ability. Hayden Matthews is doing okay. He reminds me of a player at school we used to call Granny Urquhart. He was a good player, but slightly stuttery and nervous at times. And there's something of the Granny in Hayden Matthews. I'm reluctantly saying at the moment, but his tackling and his interceptions are precise. He can do it. He's got the art of defending, and he got a lot of applause during the game. So he's doing okay. But if he's encouraged to carry the ball out of defence, he has to be able to rely on others to protect his back. I just say that because that's what went wrong for the Blackburn goal. Ibane Boat, I've talked about. His confidence is growing. It's all important for our players. That's why I use that word probably too much. But with it for Boat, there comes some pace and some sharpness, which certainly wasn't there in his first few games, but it's coming through. Callum Lang is back on the score sheet with a typical emphatic Langy strike, and such a relief for all of us to see someone latch on to yet another wonderful Murphy cross. The roar that went up for that goal was something else. And it was so nice that it is in front of the Fratton end. Although, I mean, I do feel sorry. When I say that, I always feel a bit guilty about it, because actually there were a lot in the Milton end of Pompey on this particular game. So it's not fair to say that it should always be at the Fratton end, but it is glorious when it is. Young Yang Minogue. Is you feel unsuited to the tension and demands of football in the basement of the league? I don't want to be too unfair, but it's challenging, and he is inevitably inconsistent at this stage of his development. Connor Chaplin. We still expect more from the boy, the man. But Blackburn was definitely a step in the right direction for Connor. Still no goals though. John Swift hasn't, I think this is fair, hasn't led our midfield as it was hoped he would. He's a footballer. He can find incisive passes others can't see. But the trade-off is when they don't find their mark. And that's becoming increasingly costly. And that too contributed to the Blackburn goal. I thought it was the right decision to replace him early in the second half. Andre Dazelle had a welcome return after his suspension. And coming onto the field, Colby Bishop looked refreshed by that short break out the side and made a difference as soon as he came on. And one would expect now that he's back and will be a starter. He was back to the target man that we expect him to be. Mark Koshnowski had a welcome and effective return to the side. He appears to have a good engine, strength and touch, and he looks worth a more extended role in the side this Christmas. Sounders, doesn't he? Before I go, a couple of quick notes about things. Johnny Moore had some sort of horrible fall, and he's back. It's been about 6 weeks. I don't think there's ever been a 6-week period for the last 50-something years that Johnny Moore's not been at Fratton. But he was back yesterday, and by the end of the game, there was a big smile on his face. I just want to say thank you to to Neil Weld and those who produced the magazine. What's it called? You know, the magazine you get at the game. I can't remember what they call them. Because Peter Harris was on the cover for Saturday the 13th of December. And he was in colour, on the cover in colour, which is something that one never saw at the time he played, the black and white days that he played in. So it's superb to see him with his Pompey shirt in colour. I've just seen that it's a very red colour. But anyway, it's a lovely picture, and it reminds me of a wonderful, wonderful player that none of you will remember, of course, because you're too young. But he was a terrific right winger. He scored a bundle of goals. He was quick. He was everything, and he scored. I saw him in the flesh. And I saw him score a goal very similar to Lange's goal, which was appropriate. But I did, from close range, smacking it. I think it was from a corner, but it was smacked it into the top of the net in the Fratton end. And I can't remember where I was in the ground, but I must have been quite close, because I remember it with such affection. Peter Harris. And that probably is down to Colin, the history man at Pompey. I bet he dug that photo out. So, Sounders, although we are deep in doo-doo, there's hope. And a surge of that and confidence could be a good Christmas present. Here's looking at you, Santa Claus. Play out, Pompey.